What's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Brown Girl Green. I'm your host, Christy Drutman, where I interview environmental leaders and advocates about the importance of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, as well as coming up with creative solutions to the climate crisis. I'm working to redefine what it means to be an environmentalist in the 21st. I am so excited, y'all, because this is my first podcast doing this in my new home here in Los Angeles, California. Newsflash to all the listeners out there who maybe thought maybe I was in the Bay Area and then they thought I was in New York and then they thought I was in LA. I am currently in LA, but you know, we're a global girly, we're a bi-coastal girly. We are doing this work all over with great people, great minds, and we are doing it. But for today, we are starting my new live home session here in Los Angeles. I'm here with my incredible friend and colleague, Sanjana, and we are going to be diving into the concept of taking care of ourselves and taking care of the planet. Mm-hmm. So on this show, I've talked a lot about the importance of valuing mental health, and I've talked about the need for resilience. And sometimes that word gets thrown out a lot, where it's like, be resilient, be resilient. It's kind of become the new buzzword for taking care of ourselves, that in order for us to show up in the work and to be in the world, we need to be resilient. But I think resilience, while it is an important concept, doesn't always have a roadmap to get there. Yes. And so I really wanted to take this time to have this episode with you because you are someone who I consider a very resilient person. And I don't say that lightly. And I think, you know, you are someone that I think can really share a lot of amazing insights with our audience based on the work and the creativity that you bring to this space. So to introduce Sanjana, I wanted to just say that, you know, Sanjana came into my life very recently in my life in the past few years in similar creative spaces in the environmental space. You know, loved seeing her curls, loved her energy. It felt like seeing, you know, me in a different font, but like also
I love that.
Yeah, like me in a different font, but also just like your own like delicious, amazing, bubbly energy radiating out into the world. And I would say the way that I define how I see you in the world is as, you know, a writer, a creator, a visionary, someone who really is going out in the world to bring your light, but like to bottle that light and have other people kind of take sips from it.
Yeah.
In your own versions and your own creations, I would say. The way that I perceive you in the world from what I know. And the one way that I want to share one of those bottles of light today is through your work with GARMI, which is your incredible project that I would love for folks to learn more about. But before we dive into all of that, I wanted to have you share a little bit about yourself and your journey that brought you to this couch today.
I love that. Thank you so much for that introduction, Christy, and thank you for having me. I'm so excited that we get to chat. I feel like you and I have conversations about these topics all the time offline, and so it's really cool to get to put some intentionality into it and see where we explore today in our conversation. So like Christy said, my name is Sanjana, and I am a climate storyteller, primarily as a writer and a filmmaker. And what that means to me really is that I get to learn from people that are doing incredible work in the face of crisis and in the face of systematic disenfranchisement, people who've been stewarding ancestral ways, people who've been stewarding any form of empowerment and access that they can towards wellness for their communities, whether that's personal wellness, community wellness, or ecosystem and planetary wellness, which, as we'll talk about, there's a thread through all those, and they're all kind of concentric circles and one and the same. What I am really all about is reclaiming the narrative from the extractive powers that be and instead trying to craft something, a story for humanity that is better for people and planet, and that can help us move into a more nourishing future for all of us. I think that the systems that we live in are extractive, right, by definition, and everything, including yourself, is seen as a resource to extract from. And so when we live in a system like that, our wellness is kind of constantly under threat, and any other form of wellness that we might have access to is typically gate-kept from most people. So it's not even really that accessible. Mm-hmm. So I think when we talk about climate activism, when we talk about climate justice, we're really talking about the right to wellness and the right to pursue wellness for everyone, and restoring that right. So that's really what I get to do, is I just get to learn from people, and I try to digest what I'm learning and make it exciting and sexy and accessible to as many people as I can, because I feel like I always say there's nothing that turns me on more than a healing future on Earth. So yeah, that's my work.
Incredible. And speaking of turn-ons, tell us a little bit more about your work with GARMI.
GARMI, yeah. So GARMI is, it means heat in Hindi, and it's a reference to a concept in Ayurveda. Ayurveda is my own ancestral ecological knowledge, and it's something that I've trained in and familiarized myself with in order to help me inform my own storytelling and activism. And in Ayurveda, there's a concept called Agni, which refers to your digestive fire. And the idea is that as a human being, right, like we say in Ayurveda, not that you are what you eat, but you are what you digest. So that is not just your food and water, but your ideas, information, interactions, like all of the inputs that you have in your day-to-day life. If your Agni, if your digestive fire is strong, that means you have a strong processing center. And so you can meet life with resilience, right? Like you can meet all of the ups and downs that inevitably will come our way with a sense of stamina. And that is the most we can hope for, right? So everything in Ayurveda is obsessed with a strong Agni and living a lifestyle and having a diet and everything that is going to help you fortify your Agni. So GARMI is a play on that, because digestive fire, that's a form of heat, right? But also heat is the warming planet. And so to me, there's the form of heat that is harmful, which is that warming of our planet, but there's a form of heat that is also really powerful for healing, which is the transformational energy of your digestive fire, of your Agni. So it's a play on that, and the idea is to sort of share the ideas that are transforming me with the hopes that they might transform any of the readers. GARMI is primarily a newsletter right now, and so I just like to write about the things that are exciting me and hope that they excite other people as well, and just keep us transforming as we adapt to the crisis ahead of us or currently happening.
I love that so much. I think going back to this concept of resilience, right? It's a loaded word, especially for women of color. I think I've been really struggling. Maybe not struggling, but I find it difficult, the word resilience at times, because I think it can be this feeling of like, okay, I need to stay strong. I need to be okay. No matter what life throws at me, like, I'm going to be okay. I'm going to be okay. But what happens when you're not okay?
Yeah.
What happens then? Then it's like, I don't think we talk enough about resilience in the face of when things are really, really not okay, right?
Yeah.
And I think especially when maybe the threshold of the experiences of what we defined as what was okay and not okay gets completely like obliterated, right? Whether it's a circumstance or something that was expected or unexpected, right? We're constantly in a state of major change and transformation. And I think when I think about resilience, it sometimes feels like you have to be almost in this constant state, because if you're not in a constant state of resilience, then you're just going to get bitten off. You know what I mean? Like it's almost like if you don't practice resilience every single day, what becomes of you? Then we live in a world where like people are like, oh, rest, be soft, take care of yourself. And again,
feels like,
I think those messages are great, but then it's like there's a tension there, right? Where it's like, I get it, like you need to have those ebbs and those flows, but at the same time, I love what you're talking about with transformation, because there's something about transformation that accepts the dark and the light for all that it is, rather than the concept of like being resilient feels like tough it out, whereas transformation is maybe like, okay, I don't know what this is.
Right.
Maybe we just observe. Maybe we take a step back and see. Right? At least that's what I'm gathering from what you're saying.
Yeah, I love that. And I think you're so right about resilience, because I think there's a version of it that I find beautiful, and there's a version of it that like pisses me off, you know, because I think that like the version that's beautiful is when I think about diversity in an ecosystem, right? It's like the more diverse an ecosystem is, whether that's a community or a non-human nature environment, the more diversity, the more resilient, because if something happens, there's a lot of inputs, there's a lot of there's like a web that everything can fall into that it's caught by, right? But I think the kind of resilience that pisses me off is exactly what you're saying, where there's kind of this like systematic injustice that's being pressed upon certain segments of people, And those people, because they're formidable, rise to the occasion. But that's not a kind of resilience that anyone should envy, right? Because like that's a resilience that's born out of necessity. And I think that, yeah, resilience, like any concept, has sort of a beauty and a difficulty in it as well. So yeah, I mean, I think transformation to me also feels like a more generative word because it takes into account the fact that, yeah, realistically, stuff is going to come up in life, right? Like no one's going to, in Ayurveda even, we talk about balance a lot. And even with climate action, a lot of it is about rebalancing carbon, rebalancing justice and resources and things like that, because we've got accumulations in some places and then we've taken a lot out of other places we've extracted. So it is really about rebalancing. But I think when I first learned these concepts in Ayurveda, it kind of stressed me out because I was like, balance, but how am I supposed to keep that balance every day in this world? And, and even with the amount of privileges that I know I have, even I find balance really hard, right? So someone who might not have access to the same kinds of wellness opportunities that I have, it must be even harder. So in my head, I was like, this sounds impossible. What is the pursuit of balance? That feels like a fool's errand. And what I've learned, the deeper that I've listened to my teachers in Ayurveda, is it's not about staying at balance. It's about knowing that imbalance is a part of life, but building tools to rebalance whenever you can. And to me, that's a bit of what transformation is as you drink in inputs from the world around you, how do you process them? How do you fortify your processing center, your digestive fire, your Agni? How do you keep that strong? In the West, we might call it like the gut-brain axis, right? Like how do you keep your gut-brain axis as strong as possible within whatever resources and chances you have so that you can process whatever life is throwing at you. And again, that's one of those things that on the one hand, I'm like, this is amazing because there's so much opportunity for healing, and something like your digestive fire, your gut-brain axis, whatever, those things can really be healed even when they've gone through a lot. But at the same time, the things that are healthy for those parts of your body and your system are, again, typically gate-kept and behind a paywall. And so it is really hard because, like you're saying, we're saying, rest is resistance, and rest is resistance, but who gets to rest? And what does rest look like? And it's not always like sleep. It's just like getting to power down the stressors in your life is what rest really is. And not everyone has the chance to unsubscribe from stressors because there are certain things that you just have to deal with sometimes, right? Like they're out of your control. So it's just kind of a question of like knowing how to curate what you can and then knowing how to nourish yourself in the face of whatever you can't control, right? Which is life.
Yeah, which is life. It's just like life be lifing.
Yeah, for real.
And I think, like there is always this discussion where like, I just remember it being this really jarring experience where like I obviously came from like a university background, was getting into activism at UC Berkeley, was very like my mental health deteriorated doing student activism. And that was a big reason I kind of stepped back. And, I had like the privilege to do that. But like, it was also like, I also was just like struggling mentally, health-wise. And I realized I couldn't show up to the work if like I just wasn't all there. And then I remember going to the Philippines and doing this incredible program where I got to work with, incredible organizers in the Philippines doing climate justice activism work, right? And it was so interesting because Philippines, most climate vulnerable country in the world, like on the top list of being on the front lines of the climate crisis. And it's interesting because in the Philippines, there's so many typhoons and so many disasters all the time. And it's just interesting because I would talk to organizers there and they're like, we learned to look at disaster with a smile. And I remember just being like, what do you mean? Yeah. And then they're like, in the Philippines, we're taught that we have to keep smiling even through the pain, through the struggle. And, that's like wild to me because it's like one of those things where it's like, it doesn't mean there's not mental health struggles. It doesn't mean that trauma isn't there from experiencing those kinds of things. But it's like, I realize more and more that, there isn't necessarily that time or that space to maybe dive into some of these deeper things around our existence or what our purpose is in the universe. It's like, no, we're here and we're going to like rely on things that are immediate to us, which means building community, making sure people are fed, making sure people have shelter, making sure they have disaster emergency plans, right?
Yeah.
And I think, like they say, like there is like, you know, these different levels of the needs people have to show up to the work. And I think that sometimes what I've realized is that people get lost in kind of feeling like they have to carry it all on themselves.
Yes.
When a lot of these things are planned by design to make you feel like you can't handle it all. There's a reason why it feels impossible to be able to pay your bills, be able to do things like climate organizing, be able to take care of your family, and on top of all of that, try to just like maintain some mental clarity in it all, right? It's exhausting.
Sure.
It's exhausting to just be a human these days, especially when you have a lot of those like systemic barriers in your way. And different cultures and different communities have their different ways of coping with it. But I think at the end of the day, everyone globally knows that this system is broken. And just those who have, like, I think have a responsibility to make it easier for the people that cannot,
that
right?
Part, yes.
And I think that's like a really important thing that you touch on with how you're structuring GARMI and your intention behind it is in order to create that digestive fire, like you're saying, there has to be people thinking about concepts like redistribution and understanding that like, if you do have the privilege and the ability to learn about these things, that you can use your resources to then do something about it.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I could not agree with all of that more. I think that, like you said, the system is designed to exhaust us, and it's also designed to disconnect us. Because I think something that's been on my mind a lot through the work is I've grown up in spaces of privilege, right? I've grown up in spaces where a lot of the people that are my peers from growing up and from university, they have a certain amount of financial resource that creates a sense of delusion that you're insulated from what's going on in the rest of the world. And so I think that's actually where a lot of my motivation to do this work comes from, is how do I make it as understandable as possible to folks who think that they're not affected by these issues and by the situations that a lot of us talk about. How can I make them understand or make them excited about participating in transformation, right? Because they oftentimes are the ones with the resources that other folks need. And so how can we bridge that gap by reconnecting? And I feel like as much as the system is designed to exhaust, it's also designed to disconnect. Because if you are disconnected from yourself on a basic level, if you're disconnected from your needs, your feelings, your senses, what just your biological system requires on a day-to-day basis, if you're disconnected from that, if you're disconnected from the resources to fulfill those things, even if you were to know about them, if you're disconnected from an understanding of how you are interwoven with everyone else around you, if you're disconnected from an understanding of how whatever's happening in your body is an imprint of what's going on in the world around you, and that's not just a philosophical concept, that's true in terms of even like the microbiota in your digestive system, right? Like you are connected to the farm worker that is toiling in 110 degrees to pick your food. You are connected to the polluters that are tainting the air and the water and the land. You're connected to algorithms and big pharma and big ag and all these things, because those are the things that are your inputs, and your inputs are what make up your microbiota, right? So you are like physically, literally connected to these systems, whether we know it or not. And I think that like...
I'm like, God, they're inside of me.
They are. But the thing I will also say, right, is like that's why to me, in a system that's designed to disconnect you, connecting is so revolutionary, right?
So
at
true.
all those levels.
That's
and
so true.
if you're connected to systems of harm, you're also connected to systems of healing. So you're also connected to the elders and the doulas and the people who are weaving abundance. Like you're connected to the folks that are fighting for safer working conditions for the farmers. You're connected to the folks that are taking on big polluters. You're connected to the folks that are growing food in affordable urban farms. You're connected to the people that are trying to make bike lanes and public transportation. Like you're connected to all of those systems also. And I think that's important to remember, because I think sometimes it's easy to think of the system as like only the things that are harmful and forget that there are people building parallel systems that are meant to address that and that are meant to give us alternate ways of living. And those are the most dangerous things to the status quo, right? Because it shows that there is a viable alternative. And that harm does not need to be the baseline. So I think as much as, whenever there are days where I'm like, oh my God, I hate that, eating healthy is so out of reach for so many people. And that even for me, even if I can reach it, it's so much of my money that goes into that, right? And which again, I'm grateful that I can even make that choice, but
it shouldn't be that way. It's a human right. Yeah,
100%.
Right.
And it makes me mad. But then you meet people that they're addressing those needs, and you're like, people have known this for hundreds of years. Like, they have nothing has ever fully snuffed out the revolutionaries, right? And I think that's important to remember too, because that's imprinted on us as well. And so my thought is always like, how do we get more people to know about that and more people consciously invested in that, especially folks with resources? How can we show them that because of all these interconnections, when we talk about planetary health, we are actually talking about personal health because they're one and the same, right? So if you have resources, folks with resources, like, put your resources towards these things because they're good for you, right? They're good for everybody. And that's why, to your point, when you have the privilege, there is that responsibility to share your resources with folks that are going to do amazing work with it, because when you're sharing, like, that responsibility is a responsibility to yourself and, like, your own family, right? And I think we tend to think of ourselves as these, like, closed circuits, this idea that, like, oh, I can become a billionaire and build a bunker or, like, go to Mars or something like that. And it's like, good luck, because the thing is, we're social creatures, and that is reflected not just in our daily need for interaction, but also in our literal physical microbiomes, right? Like, if you don't have a diversity in your body of these bacteria, you have 40 trillion bacteria just in your gut and only 30 trillion cells in your human body.
Wow.
Which is why 30 trillion human cells in your human body, 40 trillion bacteria cells in your body. So you are kind of like more bacteria than you are human,
Whoa.
which is amazing. There's a community within you, is my point, right? So even if you think that you're like this, like, closed circuit, you're not, because you have like 40 trillion bacteria within you that just you need to survive. So it's just a reminder that you just can't possibly not be interconnected, right?
Yeah. I think definitely when it comes to understanding, like, our interconnectedness, I think there's a lot of beauty with that, right? It's like, our space in the universe and the cosmos, right? Where it's like you feel like you float between being, this human being, but also being a, this energy, this otherworldly, self. And I think there's something really beautiful in the potential of that, right? Where it's like, if we can understand our own humanity and understand, be curious about, like, what are we made of and why are we here? Those bigger questions.
The spirituality around
it, but also the practicality of it, of, like, okay, like, I think a lot of people are living in the mode of, like, let me do things quick, hyper consumption. I need things quick. I need it convenient. I need to numb myself. I need to not feel these painful things, and I need to just survive, right?
Yeah.
Most people are operating like that in this world, because taking the time to really feel your feelings is excruciatingly painful.
Ooh, yes.
As I've experienced, like, I've actually taken the time this year and this summer in particular to actually go down. And it's been the most debilitating, dysregulating, painful, horrible time of my life, but also the most transformational.
Yes.
And they don't tell you about that part.
Yeah.
I don't know how much you talk about that in GARMI. It's like, oh, it's not going to be... There's obviously a lot of joy. There's so much joy. And I want to get to that later. I want to take a moment to give space for the pain.
Yeah.
The pain of transformation, right? People, like, let's say your audience, the people that are reading GARMI and are in these spaces, they may feel a lot of pain to wake up to recognize how they are interconnected to systems that are actively exploiting and hurting other people, right?
100%.
That's a painful thing to wake up to.
Yeah.
To understand that you are playing a role in that, whether you like it or not. And how do you stay in that pain, instead of just being apathetic?
Yeah.
Instead of just saying, well, it is what it is.
Yeah.
I'm going to continue to benefit from it.
Yeah.
What is my incentive here to actually care?
Right. That's such a good question.
So how do you
Yeah. I think about that as like growing pains, right? And I think it's so valid. It's something I've only learned in the last few years even, is how to your point, like face emotions head on and let them in and let them do what they need to do and tell me what they're here to tell me, because without that, there isn't any transformation, right? Because then I don't even know what I'm transforming towards, and I don't have something to transform away from. I don't have the information that I need. So I feel like our emotions are indicators, and they're sort of way markers, and they're not always fun. And I think that I've had to learn that. Like, I've had to learn that hard emotions aren't something to fix with a smile or fix with a solution of some kind, right? Because sometimes they're just there to be like, this is how you feel. And I actually think that's really, really a big part of what I explore with GARMI, which is this idea of sensuous socioecology, which I can break that down because that's kind of a mouthful, but it's also a phrase I just sort of made up, but it stands on... Coined it! But very much stands on the shoulders of giants, right? Like stands on the shoulders of people who I've been learning from, like Adrienne Maree Brown and pleasure activism, for example, or Audre Lorde. So to break it down, basically sensuous means relating to the senses rather than the intellect, right? Sensuality, as defined by Evian Whitney, means the practice of paying attention with your senses, so like your five senses, right? And then socioecology, socio just means relating to society. Ecology, I love this word because we use it all the time in our work, and it was so late in the game that I learned that eco is actually, it just means home. And so ecology is the study of home, right? So when you put it all together, to me, the question that GARMI really explores is, how is paying attention with your senses a way to reconnect to your home, in yourself, in your society, and in the planet as a whole, right? And I think that senses are not always going to give you pleasurable information, because sometimes they're there to protect you. Like, they're there to be like, this hurts. Don't touch that. It's going to burn you, right? Whatever it might be. And that can be on an emotional level too, where it's like this experience that you're going through. It's painful. There's grief or there's anger, right? And I think that it's necessary to hold those things. And to me, the way that I can sit with it is by knowing that it's impermanent. And that doesn't mean that it's going to go away forever, but that I won't feel that way forever, right? Because the anger that I feel at the systems, I'm always going to feel that. I'm always going to feel angry, but I don't feel angry in every moment, right? And so I think one thing that helped me when I started to come into this work and realize just what the fuck was going on, like, and how deep how deep everything that's going on is, because that is earth-shattering, right?
It is. When you realize what's going on with the collapsing of ecosystems and
how intentional it is. I think that is what broke my heart. I don't think it didn't even hit me the same way when I found out what was happening. It's when I found out that the systems were designed by specific people
who knew what the hell they were doing,
who knew what was going on, and who knew that it depended on the extraction of not just natural resources, but other people, right? And like other non-human beings. And I think it just broke my heart. And I think that the only thing that really kept me going was realizing that there's more to it, right? Like there's people fighting that, and there's people who refuse to give up hope, because hope is not, oh God, I saw this quote and I don't remember who said it, but it was that something to the effect of, hope, people think hope is this flowery, delicate thing, but hope actually just got up from the pavement with dirt in her mouth and spat out a tooth ready for another go. And I was like, yes, that's the thing. Like, hope is not a luxury. Hope is a necessity. And I think what gets me through that pain that's necessary for growth is remembering that there's something I'm growing towards, right? There's people and ideas and worlds that I believe in that are possible, that are being worked on and built right now. And then I'm like, okay, I can be angry. I need to be angry because it reminds me what's important and what's not working. But I don't need to stay in my anger, because there's something else to do. There's something else that requires my energy that I need to be present for.
Incredible. I've realized that too. I've realized that there's a lot of things in this world to be angry about, like both an interpersonal and a systemic level, right? Yeah. But I've learned that, like, especially for women of color, like, we hold our anger in a lot. And
like ancestrally, too.
Yeah. And I think there is something that's really important about learning what to do with anger.
Yeah.
And I love what you're saying is where, like, you have to find ways to sit with it, to learn what it's trying to tell you and to use that to create new moments of action and to protect and to defend, right? And I think there's something really deep there where I think a lot of us, especially myself, I'll only speak for myself, but I've talked to other women of color about this, where it's like, we hold in all this anger, we don't ever express it, and then it turns into illnesses, it turns into heart attacks, it turns into long-term
panic attacks
because we just are constantly in a state of pushing that feeling aside of the anger and the sadness. And I've been learning more and more how to create a home for my anger, and learning that like anger is trying to usually teach us that there's a different way and there's a different path, and that there is deeper wisdom within each of us that is trying to guide us towards elevating that to be more in alignment with the life we want to live, to the values we want to embody, and the people we want to surround ourselves with, and the causes we want to fight for, right? And I think in that way, anger can be this really beautiful tool that, when utilized correctly and we develop that healthier dialogue and relationship with it, can show us new possibilities and realities moving forward, right? And so going back to what we were talking about before with sitting with the pain, I think it requires you to have a lot of somatic tools to learn how to be safe in that, right? And I actually saw this incredible Instagram post, and I am so sorry to the amazing creator who I cannot remember at this moment, but later on I will tag them in the show notes. They posted an amazing post saying that, like, you can't really appreciate nature if you're dysregulated.
Yeah, true.
There has been many times where maybe I've wanted to be like, let me go to a forest and go hug a tree. And I sit there and
why isn't it working?
And I am spiraling and I am like just angry and I'm upset, and maybe I didn't eat enough and maybe I didn't prepare myself to be in that moment to connect with nature. And unfortunately, as much as there is amazing studies that show that like things like forest bathing and being in nature can, you know, on a cellular level heal us, we can't really do that if we are not in a safe sense of being. And I've learned that the hard way. Like, I've tried so many things. Like, I've tried, you know, exercising, working out, doing all these things. But then there's just times where you just have to sit and you just have to realize you're still running away from the feelings.
Totally.
And I just realized that, like, this year, you know, in my 29th year of life, like, it took me this long. Because, like, I think for a lot of us that especially do activism work, we tend to have a habit of intellectualizing our feelings. Because we're like, well, it's the system, it's this, it's that, it's this, it's that, it's that person, it's that broken thing, it's XYZ reason. But like, you can go on and on the why. But deeper, it's not going to remove the anger and the sadness.
Right.
Because then you're just stuck there. Then you're like, well, yeah, this sucks. And this is where I'm at, and this is where I'm going to be. And I even felt that way this morning. Like, I was feeling this very, like, victim mentality in some ways of, like, yeah, like, things are effed. Like, the world sucks. Like, there's nothing we can do. Planetary collapse. You know, all of the climate doomism in the world, right? But, like, that's really just a cry from, like, the earth and your ancestors that's just telling you that, like, you just gotta sit and cry and feel freaking pissed. But you have to, like, be there and fully feel it because you're meant to feel it in that moment, so then you can move on. And that is I'm learning, those are the ways that you learn to build safe and trust in your nervous system. And that is actually how then, once you actually feel it all, you created that safety, you're kind of parenting yourself, then it's like, okay, wow, now I can actually touch this tree. I can actually smell the air around me. I can actually feel the breeze, feel the leaves.
Pathways are cleared,
The pathways are clear. Now I can actually bring in those other sensations because I actually feel regulated, safe in my body. Now I can bring in those messages that Mother Earth is trying to give to me. But it's like, in the meantime, it's like, Mother Earth, I gotta take a second, because right now, like, I'm like, you know? And I think it's a lot of people, right? So this goes back to what you were talking about, this disconnect. Majority of the world is disconnected and is exactly in the state that I'm describing, where they're either stuck in the past, stuck in the future, stuck in survival mode. How do we expect them to care about the planet if that's where they're at, right?
Well, one thing I would say, too, is, like, that anger and all those emotions, that's Mother Earth too, right? Because you're also Mother Earth. And so I think that when that's just a more pressing need that she's giving you right now versus going to hug that tree. She's like, the anger is the priority right now, right? And I think about that a lot because I think about how when you engage in anything that is healing for yourself, you are healing the planet because you are a part of the planet. And so you're healing a piece of the planet when you're healing yourself, right? So it's really important to do that and to take that time. I think for a lot of people, it either is or it feels like a luxury. And I understand that. I think that, you know, even for me, I think I used to see the idea of processing my emotions, quote unquote, as wallowing, you know? And I used to feel like, you know, I was like, why are people sitting around like processing, you know, like, can't they just get over it? Can't they, you know? And I would do exactly what you said, where I would intellectualize my emotions and I would say, okay, I'm angry because of this. Let me move on, right? And the metaphor, I have two metaphors that come to mind when I think of that, right? One is when I think about composting. If you have food scraps, right, and you just like dump them on top of the soil, they're just going to rot. You have to take the time to dig a hole, put the food scraps in the hole, cover it back up in order for those food scraps to become nutrients in the soil so that whatever's next can grow. So if I'm just dumping my anger off to the side somewhere, it's just going to rot. It's not going to go away. And it's not going to integrate. It's going to get bigger. It's going to get smellier. It's not going to integrate into the soil and give me anything worthwhile. It's not going to transform, right? Because I'm not digesting it. So I think that's another, like composting is soil digesting whatever you're putting inside of it, right? It's digesting it and it's making it nutrients. And if I'm not taking the time to dig it in, then I'm not digesting it. I'm not applying my digestive fire to it. I'm just letting it sit there and I'm letting it rot. And I'm also letting it go to waste because there's stuff in there that could be really valuable to me, but I'm just letting it sit there. That's the first metaphor. And the second, which is just a little bit funnier, is I think about anger as like a friend, and it's a friend who's come over to like give you something, and it's like you open the door, you see it, and you shut the door on it. And that friend's going to be upset because they're going to be like, I brought you something, you didn't acknowledge it, you didn't say thank you, you just shut the door on my face, and so I'm going to build some resentment against you. But if instead you say, thank you so much, you accept the gift, then the friend can be like, all right, I did what I came to do, you know, and like, you're square, you're good. And like that, to me, the whole idea is you have to acknowledge it for what it's asking you to acknowledge. And then once you do that, it can integrate into you in a valuable way. And I think to me, that's not separate from climate action. Like, that is caring about the planet, right? Because if we're always out here talking about we're all interconnected and we are not apart from, we are a part of nature, right? Like, I say that all the time. But if I'm not living that way, if I'm not taking my own well-being as seriously as I'm taking the well-being of my loved ones and my planet, then I'm not actually living that way. And again, I want to, obviously there's a caveat that everyone has different circumstances. And so, I mean, you know, apply this in whatever way you can with whatever chances you have in your circumstances, because not everyone can just be like, and I'm also not advocating for anyone to be like, it's all about me. You know, that's not it either. Right. We have these concentric circles of connectivity, but I think sometimes we have a tendency either to only think about what's going on in ourselves or what's going on in the world around us. And we really have to, I think, be better about doing both and having empathy for both, because the personal is political, the personal is planetary, right? And vice versa. The political is personal, the planetary is personal. So just remembering that caring for all of those things is one and the same and equally important.
No, I love both of those metaphors because, yeah, I'm like, wow, I got lots of thoughts and feelings I want to compost. I'm like, and figure out, you know, what is the season that it needs to blossom into something else, right?
Right. And sometimes it takes a second also to figure out, like, you know, in an actual garden to compost, you know, you got to dig the hole. But when you take that metaphor into human life, what does that work of digging the hole actually mean or look like? It looks different for everyone and looks different in every situation. And sometimes the project itself is figuring out what is the work that I need to do to help get this digested, you know? Right.
And I think that's like how people can show up more for the communities and the ecosystems that they care about, because I think if you're able to understand your why and you know what grounds you and what roots you, I think there is these opportunities then to explore your sensations and what makes you feel good. And I think people inherently know that, but we don't really ask ourselves that. Like, this kind of work or these people or this thing makes me feel calm and my nervous system's not activated. So like, regardless of like privilege and access, whatever, I think human beings in general, like, we can tell, I think on an intuitive, intrinsic level, like, what things in our lives are making us feel good and in flow and regulated and whatever. And then there's times where there are situations where we become dysregulated or we get triggered by something or a circumstance happens, expected or unexpected, and we get completely derailed. And I think those are especially the times where you have to know what your why is. And again, like, for those of you out there that are listening to this, I don't want you to have an existential crisis of like, well, if I don't know what my why is, then I'm screwed. That's not what I'm saying. I think your why could even be trying to figure out what your why is.
Yeah.
Your why is a journey to keep being in a state of transformation, I think is what I'm like, it all comes back to that, honestly, at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And I think that's like what I'm getting out of this conversation is just realizing that like in this work is very emotionally driven in a lot of ways. I think it's very logical and honestly should be more focused in like, you know, economics and policy because there's literal like financial and political risks on a very existential level that like politicians and people in corporate America are not taking as seriously as they need to be. And the alarm bells for them are not going off. Like they're not being triggered the same as those of us who are like in this work and are seeing it every single day and understand exactly like what's at stake. I think there is a lot of people that are in these higher up positions that are maybe some of them like definitely like do care and are trying to figure that out and are trying, and I do believe that because I know those people, I'm friends with those people, right, who are in the system, in these like places that could pull levers, that could redistribute resources, right? But I think there's a lot of other people that would rather look the other way in a lot of ways. And I think humanity is waking up more and more to recognizing that like you said, you can try to avoid other people's anger, but the more you avoid it, the more it's going to like be confronted in your face. And then you're going to have to deal with it. And then it's probably going to make things even worse than it needed to be. And I think of that on like both an individual level to like a systemic level, that not to be like, oh, time is running out. But I think there is this feeling of like, there's so much we could be doing that we still have a lot of time and resources and ability to do it, but we need people to like
wake up.
And but I think in order to wake up, it requires like people to be able to do this like emotional somatic work. I genuinely believe it because I don't think showing people data, screaming at them like with the data is really working.
Yeah. Totally.
So I think there has to be some more like emotion, teaching people to tap in and not just tapping in for like their own individual healing, but for them to take that healing and to be like you said, you've gained these tools. Okay, now I can show up and understand. If you really dive deep, you will understand that your suffering is tied to my suffering, tied to their suffering. And so you do have some sort of responsibility, I believe, as a human being in the role of your own suffering and your own joy to do something about that. And maybe those are my values, and maybe other people don't have that, but I have that. If I exist, then there's probably other people that exist that probably feel that way too, I guess, right? And I guess you're doing GARMI, you believe there's other people that feel that way too.
Yeah, and you know, I actually think that when people are, to me, it's a question of narrative, right? Every structure that we have is a reflection of a certain story that is dominating the world. And that story typically has been the colonial narrative that humans have dominion over nature, humans have dominion over certain other humans have dominion over women's bodies, men have dominion specifically over women's bodies, et cetera, right? And so it's this idea of domination, it's the idea of individualism, that you can operate as a closed circuit and you can be insulated by accumulating capital from whatever's going on in the world around you and in the communities around you. And we know that that is not the only narrative that exists in the world. There are communities around the world that throughout history and to this day have operated from a completely different set of assumptions, right? And even when you think about economics based on what we're saying about ecology, economics is just the management of the home, right? So it's like, how are we going to allocate resources? And something that blew my mind that Robin Wall Kimmerer actually highlighted in a podcast I listened to a while ago, she was like, the baseline of modern economics is an assumption of scarcity, but scarcity is an assumption. It's not a fact, right? And scarcity depends on how we allocate things. And if we assume scarcity, then we create scarcity. So it becomes sort of a circle, a cycle. And my point in saying that is just that I think when you're talking about this emotional and somatic work, a lot of that is about stories and storytelling. And I actually think a lot more people would share the same values and already do, but we've just been all fed different stories. And it's a reminder to me that in a lot of ways, politicians across the aisle have a lot more in common with each other than they do with us. And we across the aisle have a lot more in common with each other than we do with them, because we're concerned about survival, safety, happiness, wellness. That's pretty much everyone, right? Like, no matter where you fall in the political spectrum, but we've all been fed different narratives about how we achieve that for ourselves and our loved ones. And that's what creates so many of these divides. So I think so much of like reclaiming the narrative is about this sort of revolutionary connectivity, right? Is reminding people and showing people that there is something really exciting to being connected with each other. Because if our language is always like, you know, what you suffer from, I suffer from, suffering, struggle. These things are all things that within the movement are valuable to talk about, right? Because within the movement, when you and I talk about the struggle, we understand what that means. We understand the end goal. We understand that as liberation. We understand that as beautiful and necessary. But if you're talking to someone that is new to this and does not want to do work because they probably already have a lot of work to do to survive in their own lives, then the idea of doing more work is not going to be appetizing. It's not going to be appealing. It's not sexy. Like, it's like, I'm tired. I'm already doing so much work to survive. Why should I do more work to protect people I don't know and to protect ecosystems that I don't understand, when I could just do what the system is telling me and like make my money and do my thing, keep my head down and get my, you know, whatever, my benefits, my blah, 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 all these things, right? And not think about this other stuff that is going to add so much stress to what's already on my plate. And so I think a lot of, you know, in any movement, and I think of Deepa Iyer's ecosystem of social change, right? Like in any movement, people serve different functions. I think my function is to figure out how to take all the amazing things that I'm learning in our movement and shout them outside of our movement. Like, how do I get more people involved that would not otherwise consider themselves climate activists? That's not everyone's role, right? A lot of people's roles are to disrupt and to deepen the movement and I love that. And I think for me, it's just about how do we grow it also, right? How do we make it the coolest place to be? Like, you want to be part of a movement that is about healing. You want to be part of a movement that is about how your joy and your wellness and your safety is intertwined with someone else's, rather than the idea that your suffering is, which is also true, but it's a question of like, what emotion are you playing on? Are you playing on people's fear, or are you playing on people's desire to be part of something cool and part of something, I don't mean cool like superficial way, I mean cool like it excites them, you know, like it makes them feel valuable and valued, and it makes them feel like they can contribute in a way that's gonna add to their lives, right? Because all these things are already true about climate action, but we just don't tend to highlight those things about it, right? Because we tend to be so focused on the fear, because there is so much to be afraid of. Right. And so I think, when I think about facing your emotions and I think about transformation, a lot of it is like, how do you digest the fear and how do you digest the realities of crisis and the realities of systemic oppression, and how do you use those nutrients to seed something new, right? And it's not even new, something that like people have been stewarding for a really long time. So putting that energy there.
Exactly. Like, I think that's, you know, for me, like, that's why I got into this work around storytelling myself, is because I think that there's just not enough attention on the good shit that's happening. Like, there's just not. And I think, like, psychologically, like, if we do put it out there that, like, really good things are happening, and that there's people doing the work, and that there is people that are trying to shift the narrative, I think it does create a little bit of those touch points where people are like, joy and abundance, like that can I can access that.
Right. And to be clear, it's not about like washing away or minimizing the pain and the crisis, right? I think it's just that people know that already.
Right.
People are already scared. People already understand that there's a climate crisis, and more than 70% of Americans are worried about it, right? Statistically, like, we already know that people are scared and people see it as an apocalypse.
Right.
But I think the thing is, when you think something's hopeless, you're not going to participate in doing something about it, because you're like, what are we going to do? The system is a system, and the climate crisis is happening, and we're all going to die. And like, that tends to be what happens. And so I think there's a lot of storytelling that still acts as if people are not already aware and scared, but they are. They're aware, they're scared. And so now it's like, what do we look towards, right? Like, what do we run towards? And I think that's what a lot of this, because when I think of even senses, right, and like sensory input as the thing that connects us to the world around us, literally, right, your senses, your sight, your hearing, your touch, your taste, all these things are giving you information about the communication going on between you and like your physical surroundings, and also your intuition, your sixth sense, right? Your gut microbiome, gut-brain axis, all of that. All these six senses are connecting you to the world and the systems around you. And they're there to protect you. They're there to tell you when something's not right. All the emotions we're talking about, the hard ones, pay attention to them. But they're also meant to be there to help you thrive and tell you what feels good, right? Like, for example, I know when I'm cooking, right, and I see a colorful palette on my cutting board, I physically feel joy, because I'm like, wow, this meal is going to be nourishing. And that's not just a function of seeing beauty as some superficial thing. That is a sensory cellular intelligence that's understanding, if a palette is colorful, it's going to hit all the nutrients that I need. It's that diversity, that resilience, right? So if it's yellows and blue, if it's yellows and oranges, that's my beta carotene. If it's dark leafy greens, that's my iron and fiber. If it's blues and purples, that's antioxidants. So my body knows, and it knows when to say yes to something, when it says this is pleasurable, this is good. And the thing that I feel like GARMI and even climate activism as a whole is really fighting for is the right to wellness, right? Because if we are living in systems where the baseline is harm, the baseline is sensory overload, can you imagine walking down the street in LA with all of your senses fully open? You would crumble, because there would be cars honking, the pavement is hot, it might smell weird, like, it's overload, right? And so you can't possibly walk around with your senses fully open all the time. For most of us who live in these cosmopolitan areas, that is too hard for your body to process. So we have to, by necessity, close down our functions to a certain extent. And what that does is it closes us off. But that's not our fault, right? That's survival. And so I think it makes sense that that's how we have to live. And you've even talked about it, right? Like, we get dysregulated. We have to sort of close down a little bit. And I do it all the time, because you have to. But then when that's our baseline, it's not just that it's kind of constant chronic stress. It's also that it's not giving our senses a chance to do the other part of their job, which is to tell us when something feels good, right? Because if they're always in survival mode, they're never going to be like, oh, here's how it feels to thrive, and here's how it feels to say, absolutely, this is pleasurable, this is nourishing for me. And that's what we're really fighting for, is like, everyone should have that opportunity, right? Everyone should have that chance. And to your point about, like, you have this responsibility if you have privilege, if you do have even 5 minutes to tap into those things, it's a way to remember how connected you are to the world around you, right? And that is healing philosophically, but also physically for all of us. If you can find 5 minutes of sensory safety for yourself, right? And I think about, we were talking about this, that a lot of times these somatic tools tend to be somatic ideas tend to be very theoretical. Like, oh, ground yourself. Okay, how? Like, I would love to. Let me know how. And I think for me, so much of what I've thought about is, if I'm talking about accessible wellness, then what is accessible, right? Because if I'm asking someone to, or if anyone's saying, like, the only way you can be well is by leaving where you are and finding trees and finding a park, and some people can totally do that, right?
But go fly to Bali,
yeah. Or even, like, go to the neighborhood park. Maybe you are working right now. Maybe you don't have time to, like, go down the street to the park, right, even if it's down the street. So how can we play with what you have literally where you are? No props, no required setting, nothing, just literally your own self. Because if we can find a way to do that, then that means that we can truly practice what we're preaching about how we're constantly connected to everything around us, right? So I think about that when I'm thinking about building like sensory meditations or sensory practices, is how do you actually do it wherever you are versus having to go somewhere or get something or pay for something, right? And yeah, in Ayurveda we say you are your own healer, and that's what I always think about.
Do you want to give us like an example of something like that? I'm like,
Yeah.
I need a little bit of a tapping into senses a little bit for our listeners.
Yeah, I mean, they're so simple, and I think the two caveats that I would say, one is everyone inhabits a unique body, so whatever senses are accessible to you, obviously tap into those. And then also just the idea that it might not even be a bodily thing, it might be a situational thing. So if you're in a room that's really loud, maybe don't tap into your hearing, right? Like that might be something that you want to keep filtered out for a little while. But I think for us today, right now, we're in a pretty nice space, your beautiful living room, and the sounds are very calming, the colors are very calming. And so something that I would do, which we can do right now if you want.
Oh my God! Sure.
It's almost like a little game of I Spy that you play with yourself, but you do it through all your senses, right? So we'll just take a second to get comfortable.
All right. This is the first time I'm doing live exercise on Brown Girl Green. This is exciting.
Do you feel comfortable closing your eyes for this?
Sure. Why not?
Okay, amazing. Okay, so we'll just take one deep breath in together and one deep breath out. And I'm going to have you take your palms and just rub them together. And just lightly press one palm against each eye. And then you can move your hands away from your face and slowly open your eyes. And then you can let your palms go and just look around the room for a second. And you don't need to share this with me, but just think through 3 things that you notice. Maybe it's something nearby on the table in front of us. Maybe you're noticing the colors and the textures that you see. Maybe it's something in the distance out the window, like the sky or the tree. I'd encourage you to find something green to look at, which is very healing for our eyes, and explore what the green looks like. Is it a plant? Does it have a lot of leaves? Do the leaves have veins? And then I invite you to take another breath in and another breath out. And now you can gently flutter your eyes shut.
Okay.
And we're just going to bring our attention to our ears. And I invite you to notice anything you can hear nearby. I'm noticing the fan. I'm noticing some footsteps outside.
Muffled voices.
Muffled voices. And I invite you to let your ears wander further to any sounds you might hear in the distance.
Passing cars.
Some city sounds. And then on your next inhale, we can bring our attention back together. And on our exhale, open our eyes. And the last one I'll do with you, since I want to be conscious of time, is touch. Which the easiest thing for me to do is you can either touch things that are around you, like we've got this couch, we've got this surface here, your hair exactly. There are also marma points in Ayurveda, which are your energetic circles, or energetic centers rather. So there are 107, but I typically just use 2. One is right here in the center of your palm. So you can just put your thumb in the center of your palm. Nice. The other is just in the middle of your eyebrows, your third eye, and I will put my middle finger right there. And what you can do is you can either, I like to just keep my finger still and just press gently, or you can massage it in a clockwise direction. And these are meant to just be almost like little stress points, right? So the idea here is like we didn't use any props except for what was already around us. And I do that intentionally because I want people to feel like they can do that wherever they are. So sometimes, as an example, right, like I'll be in a kind of stressful meeting or conversation with somebody, and I can't be like looking around like, oh, what do I see over there? I can't be like sniffing and like connecting through my nose, but I can, under the table, just like press my palm a little bit, and that just grounds me back into myself, reminds me I'm here, I'm good, I'm a biological being, and I need to make sure that I'm eating, I'm drinking water, etc.
I know, I'm realizing I'm a little dehydrated.
Yeah.
I was like doing that, I was like, I'm actually like pretty thirsty.
Yeah, let's take a sip of water.
I'm like, I'm engaging my senses and I'm dry. No, it's hilarious. That was great.
There you go. But the reason I like to do this is because you can go through any or all of your senses. You can even check in with your sixth sense. I like to think about, what's my intuition saying today? How does my belly feel today? What have I eaten? What have I had to drink? And doing this is a way of just grounding back into yourself as your first home, right? Like your physical being as your first home. And that's the way that you experience your other homes, your communities, your planet, right? This is your first home. And the other power in my mind to doing this is that, again, in a system that is designed to disconnect, connecting to me is so revolutionary, and the revolution, as so many people will say, starts within. So this is a way of using your senses to stoke that revolution within, to keep that digestive fire strong. And I think it's really powerful work, because when you are tapped into your senses and to your intuition, so all six senses, you can feel when something's right and when something's wrong. And you won't stand for the things that don't feel right? Whether that's for yourself, for the people you love, or for the planet as a whole, you'll be like, I know that's wrong. I know something's up with that. But the more disconnected you are, the more pliant we're likely to be to extractive forces, because we're not realizing when something feels wrong or when something feels like it's us. And so the more we can be connected, the more we can sort of opt out of whatever is within our power to opt in or out of, we can be a little bit better about those things, right?
Yeah.
So that's the idea behind it.
I love that. And thank you for doing those exercises.
Thanks for doing it with me.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to keep practicing those, because it definitely made me, like, even wake up to, like, recognizing my own space and noticing, like, a tree nearby that I've never even, like, really looked at that intentionally and things like that. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah. It's, like, silly simple, but that's what I love about it.
I'm just curious, like, as you've done GARMI, like, how have you seen yourself transform in the process? Like, as much as you have readers, you're also, like, the creator behind it, and the intention is for you to evolve over time, right? And explore that. So how has creating this transformed you?
That's such a good question, and probably one I should reflect on even more on my own, but, like, in my own time. But I think when, let me think about that one. I feel like that's something I really, really want to like, journal about at some point, because I think it's done a few things for me. First of all, I think it's made me be more public about learning and changing my mind, and it's made me more honest about the fact that I didn't know all this stuff. Do you know what I mean? Because I think sometimes in environmental spaces, there's this tendency to be like, I've always known that this was this and that was that. And I'm like, no, we all learned somewhere along the way. Most of us, right? Because, like, most of us grew up with I grew up with a very colonized mindset, and I didn't know that. And it took me a long time to unlearn that. So I think that transformation is something that I explore on GARMI sort of retrospectively. But the way that it's transformed me in real time is, I think that it's helping me be more open about how much I'm learning and how each learning is alchemizing differently in me. Does that make sense? Like, everything, every newsletter that I write is something that's on my mind. It's something that I've recently been pondering myself, and that I get to then share with people. So I think it keeps me on top of my development, but I think it also kind of forces me to practice what I preach, because I think that's something that I've gotten away without doing in the past. You can, like,
Sorry, my life.
You can be academic about these concepts all day long. You know, you can be like, this is what the system does, and this is how it should be instead, and this is what people could do and should do, and whatever. But again, with this idea of the personal is political, or the revolution begins within, I think for me, GARMI is my way of almost being accountable to the revolution within me. And if I am writing about these things, every article that I write, at the end of it, I'm like, I really need to take this advice. You know, I really need to incorporate this into my own life. And even as an example, this latest one was about the gut microbiome. And as I was writing it, I was like, my Ayurveda doctor has been telling me this, and I have been sort of a little lenient about it, and I really need to recommit to these things. So it helps me keep my compass pointing north, I think.
I love that.
Yeah.
And I think at the end of the day, all of us are trying our best, right? I think what I've learned also this year in processing my feelings and trying to hold space for both anger and grief, but also joy and celebration, is we have to practice radical acceptance and radical compassion. And, you know, both of those terms come from incredible teachers like Tara Brach and other folks in the wellness space. And, you know, they always are emphasizing that. I think in the work of climate activism, we have to radically accept that the circumstances that we live in are full of a lot of gaps and holes and pain, and that at the same time, there's something really beautiful and curious and interesting about that prospect of like, well, if the world is burned down to the ground, then what's left?
Yeah.
But then it's like, what's left then?
Yeah.
And I think there's something there that you could either view it from a lens of, well, that's that, or could we do something with that? Yeah. Could we make something new? Could we learn from ecosystems and how they rebuild? Could we learn from them? They're not sitting there and being like, well, that's that.
Yeah.
They have to keep going.
Right.
They have to keep going.
Yeah, that resilience that we were talking about.
Right. And I think for those of us here, I think we have to encourage that, inspire that in each other, that like we can create spaces so that way we all can feel like we can accept ourselves, accept each other, our place in the world. And I think at the end of the day, I think that's what actually people are really seeking out, is people want to feel like they're a part of something bigger. They want to feel like they are contributing somehow to something more beautiful and more prosperous in the world. And I think we've never had a better time than now to do that in taking care of the environment, in thinking about how we are protecting resources for the next generation. I think it is something that is both existential, but is this opportunity that I think can make all of us change in really beautiful ways on a personal level as well. And I think that's like why I've done this work, is because I never really considered myself an environmentalist, but I stayed curious. I was open to learning, and it's created a life that I never even imagined possible for myself. Getting to meet such incredible people, getting to have experiences to learn about how to connect to the earth in ways that I never thought were possible. And so I would say that I am a product of someone who actually took the chance to explore transformation. And I can say very confidently that as much as it's made me learn almost too much about what is up in the world, it's also, I think, made me a better person. And in a weird, selfish way, but collective way, I think that alone should be a reason why people should consider exploring these kinds of concepts.
Totally.
So with that being said, I'm just really grateful that you came on the show today.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Yeah, sharing your wisdom with GARMI. And so how can people learn more about you, learn about GARMI, support the work? Plug it in.
I love it. So you can subscribe to GARMI. It's a Substack, garmi.substack.com. That's GARMI. There is an Instagram. I never use it. But you can follow my personal Instagram, which is SANJ and 3 underscores.
Incredible, incredible. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Christy.
Yeah, check out GARMI, and I hope that you all check out, some of the exercise we listed below. I'll have Sanjana share some more resources of any books and things, and maybe even GARMI Substacks that you'd want to plug for people to read and ponder on, and questions they can lead through their lives. But I think if we take anything away from today's episode, is that it's important work. And even if this episode doesn't resonate with you right now, because maybe you think somatic stuff is woo-woo, and maybe you think...
That was me at one point in time, too.
Oh, definitely me. Yeah. I hope that you bookmark this somewhere down the line and know that you're not alone in holding really big feelings during really big, scary times in the world, and to understand that that's all normal, it's human, but that I do think we all have a responsibility to act in whatever means and abilities that looks like, and especially to do it for those who cannot. And so with that being said, I hope you all enjoyed today's episode, and make sure that you continue subscribing to the Brown Girl Green podcast wherever you get your shows. Leave a rating. It really helps. Thank you to all the folks who always leave reviews on my show and give me 5 stars. Keep it honest, keep it real. But if you really meant that 5-star, I love you.
They do.
And and make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/browngirlgreen, where you're going to get to watch the video version of this podcast and see the visuals of what we were talking about today. And make sure to follow @browngirl_green and the @browngirlgreen podcast. Catch you on the next episode. Thanks, y'all. Bye.